Hi, everybody. Hey, this is Mr. Forstier, and I'm going to be your instructor for CIT40 Computer Operating Systems this semester. I thought I would go ahead and make this overview recording, give you an idea of what the class is about, so you can get started. All right, let me start off by sharing the screen. Fantastic. Here we go. Okay, when you go inside of Canvas, this class is going to be done in Canvas for, you're going to be able to get the information, take exams and stuff inside here, copies of course outlines and so on. So everything should be contained within Canvas other than the books that you have to get for this class, okay? All right, so again, as I said, my name is Mr. Forstier. First order of business is there's a mandatory welcome discussion board that has to be posted by January 12th, 9 p.m. in order to stay in the class. If you don't participate in this one, you'll be dropped as a no-show. The discussion board is going to be very simple. It's basically your name, first and last name that matches with WebAdvisor, so I know it's really you, and then a brief description about your technology skills, okay? And then on Tuesday, I'm going to have another overview session beyond this little video and stuff to allow people to interact and ask more questions should you choose. It's not a mandatory session, but you know, it'd be a good way for you to have one opportunity to really kind of interact with me online. And then we kind of go from there. I'll try to record this and post this into one of the modules to get started. First thing a bit is to remember this is a 100% online course. Okay, so it's not asynchronous, excuse me, it's not synchronized in any way. Typically, I'll communicate through you and you will communicate back and forth through emails. I will usually try to send out an email on Monday and once again on Friday to remind you what's due that week or what you're supposed to be working on, okay? You know, a lot of your assignments and activities and stuff, almost everything's going to be posted inside of Canvas. There are going to be weekly group homework. So I'm going to form you into groups. So probably after that Tuesday session or whatever, I will break everybody down into groups and stuff and then send you an email of which group that you'll be assigned to, okay? So I'll take care of the group assignments and stuff. And then each week, starting in week 2, you'll have weekly homework that the group will do. Now keep that, when I say group homework, it's like, what you should get into the habit of doing is whatever's assigned that week, each person individually in the class should work on that homework assignment. And then once a week, your group comes together or compares notes, whether you do it in your own Zoom session or you decide to do it through Google Docs or OneDrive or whatever, however you want to share your documents. But at the end result is that somebody from the group needs to be able to email me one completed document with the questions and the answers. I give you the documents in a Word format, so you can just basically provide the answers to that. Add a list at the top of every member in the group and a percentage on how much they participated in the class, in that assignment. So if everybody participated, then you can say, here's a list of all my first and last names of everybody in the group. Everybody should get 100%. If Mark didn't participate, then you should put down Mark's first and last name and put down 0% because he didn't participate in that week's homework, okay? As far as the communications for you, like I said, I'm going to send information to your Canvas email, no, excuse me, to your Fresno City College email, not your Canvas messaging system. A lot of people are, you know, misconstrue and they think that the Canvas message board, because it has an inbox and an outbox, is the same thing as school email. It's not, okay? You need to check your school email. That's going through the My Portal on the school's website. When you log in, you need to check that every day for this class, okay? Just get in the habit of doing that. Do not just simply rely upon the Canvas messaging system. It's not reliable. A lot of times things don't get through. Your official communication should all go through the My Portal, your official Fresno City College email account, not the Canvas messaging system. Are we good on that one? Cool. Okay. All right. Now let's move forward and stuff. Time commitment for this class. Yeah, 15, 20 hours a week, probably at least that. Okay. Sometimes it might be less. It just depends. Okay. PC or a Mac. Okay. Absolutely. And broadband internet, DSL, whichever. Dial-up's not going to work. Okay. Tablets, smartphones, Chromebooks will not work for this class. If you don't have a PC or Mac or have access to a PC or a Mac, then you can't take this class. You'll have to wait till next semester when you can get access to it. Now, the Fresno City College has a library computer lab, but they're not going to allow you to install stuff on there. So, you know, part of your work for the operating system is the ability to install onto a computer. So you need to get access to a computer someplace where you'll actually be able to install. If you have your own PC or a Mac, you should be able to install things like VMware, or, you know, if you're a Mac user, Boot Camp, There's also VirtualBox, whatever. I'm going to focus on just using VMware because it's most reliable. It's the most name recognized one out there, and then install the particular operating system and go from there. Okay, so again, let me repeat, no tablets, smartphones, or Chromebooks will be allowed. If you don't have, if all that's that you have, you can't take this class this semester. You have to wait until you have access to the technology. Okay, setting up your Mac and stuff is your responsibility. I'm not responsible for any technical issues. If you wipe out your drive trying to set that up, that's not my problem. Okay, I just want to let you know, just be careful what you're doing. It's very simple. The programs are pretty direct and stuff. You need a relatively new computer. It doesn't have to be like really brand new, 2022, but you probably can't use one that's like 10 years old, okay, or 7 years old. If you got something that's 3-5 years old, it'll do fine probably, okay. More RAM, the better. Be great if you have like 12, gigs of RAM. That would be sweet, whatever. But hey, we'll go for there. Anyway, responsibility for technology is your responsibility. There are weekly assignments that are due on Saturday, 9 p.m. All the deadlines for this class are typically Saturday, 9 p.m., except for the final, which would be a Tuesday night at 9 p.m., okay? Outside of that, the group homework. I do not accept homework from individual students, only groups. It's your responsibility to participate in the group. If not, you'll get a 0 on that assignment, okay? So if you try to send me a go around your group, you're going to get a 0 because I don't accept individual homework, okay? All right, on that Tuesday, like I said, there'll be an overview session that I will try to conduct and allow you guys to be able to ask questions, interact, more so than you could possibly do in emails. This way you get kind of a one shot and be able to get an idea of how things are going. Here's the link to the account, and that will be Tuesday, January 11th from 9 to 10. If you can't make it, that's fine. I'll try to record the session. It's not a mandatory session, but it's a good chance for you to be able to see me, ask a few follow-up questions or whatever, and then go from there, okay? All right, down here at the bottom stuff is a copy of the course outline, and I also put it in the modules folder as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the modules tab here, okay? And then once I'm in the modules tab, I'm going to change to your view to show you what it would look like from your screen. There we go. So here's the discussion post that's required by January 12th, 9 p.m. to stay in the class. And again, if you do not post this, okay, if you do not post this by 9 p.m. and stuff, you're going to get dropped from the class. That's a deal breaker, okay? If not, you'll be just a no-show. All right, here's a copy of the syllabus. And then down here and stuff, there's a link of how to set up the student activity disk. And then a link to find a copy of Windows XP, put a pin in that for a second, and product keys or whatever, Linux, various web links and stuff, and then starting chapter or week 2, okay? So let me come back up here and stuff where I mentioned a Windows XP, okay? I'm using a Windows XP book for this class, really big, bulky book, okay? You can find it relatively cheap out there on the web. Bookstore is not a cheap place or whatever, okay? So keep in mind that there's probably some e-versions of the book, okay, that you can get. I can't sanction it because they're probably not done legitimately, but as long as you've got the actual book, that's fine with me, okay? It's not like you're bringing it to class to worry about that, okay? There's a second book for this class, which is on the Linux, which we'll use in the second 9 weeks. Again, you can find electronically, sometimes the bookstores or places on the web, chug.com or something like that, whatever, will have access to an e-version of it because they've already done it officially and got permission. All right, let me come up here and open up the syllabus, okay? So here's the syllabus itself, okay? And I'm kind of zoom in a little bit further. There we go. So up here's my contact information that you'll be able to get to. Again, the school email address for the portal is what you want to use, okay? And then I break everything down from week to week here, as you can see, and I tried to put the due dates of any assignments in yellow. So what's due this first week of week 1, that discussion post by Wednesday, January 12th, 9 p.m. Again, for this class, make a note. The deadline is not 11:59 or midnight at 9 on Saturday. No, it's 9 p.m. We good? 9 p.m. So 8:59 works. 9 p.m., 9:01 does not work. Okay, get it done before 9 p.m. deadline. Got it. Okay. If not, everybody in the group's going to get 0. Okay, so please don't do that. Okay, and then starting in week 2, you're going to read through the chapter 1 and getting started with an operating system, and that chapter 1 group homework will be due by Saturday, January 22nd. So you're going to have to coordinate your group. Again, look at the activities and stuff, the study guide, which is the homework basically that I'm going to show you in a bit. Okay, each individual person, I would recommend that you do your homework, and then you get together and post, everybody post it into a Google Doc or a OneDrive or something like that. Or if you want to get fancy, have a Zoom session and have you guys then compare, your answers, and then develop one document with the names at the top that has a name for each person in the group, first and last name, and then whether or not that person should get 100% or a 0% or a 50%, depending if they participated. They didn't show up, 0. They showed up empty-handed, I probably tend to be 0, okay? Or maybe some pity points or whatever, okay? If they only got half of it done, then say 50%, okay? This way, everybody who actually fully participates should get 100% of the graded assignment. That should be pretty easy, but if you don't participate, it's not the group's responsibility to chase you down. It's your responsibility as group member to make sure you're fully participating in the group homework, okay? Remember, tests are not group activities. Okay, so anyway, so there's a breakdown, and then what we'll have is, you'll see, is every so often we'll have an exam week. Basically what I do is we'll cover about 5 chapters and have one big exam, 150 multiple choice questions, and then we'll have a few weeks later, another month later or so, we'll have a final, a Windows final, and that's 250 questions covering all those chapters that we covered. And then we'll do the same kind of thing for Linux, first, midterm, and then a Linux final. Okay. All right. So how do you get a hold of me? What's the best way to get a hold of me? Well, I think the best way to get a hold of me is through email. That's what seems to be the best. I just want to let you know, I'm not a robot. I'm not available 24/7. That ain't going to happen, folks. Okay. If you email me, you should expect a response within 24 hours. If I can get a response the same day, fantastic. But the other thing is that I'm a husband, I'm a dad. I got other things that I have to do too. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I'm not available on the weekend. So if you try to email me on Friday or Friday afternoon, you may not get a response back until the following Monday. I can't bail you out. If you guys mess up and stuff on the weekend, you're going to have to live with whatever the points are. If your internet goes down and you don't get the assignment in, it's a 0. Okay. If your power goes out, it's a 0. Okay, be proactive. These assignments and stuff become available typically on Sunday at 12 a.m. They don't take that long to go through and find the answers and figure out what the answers are. As far as your discussion with the group, however you wish to do that, share these or whatever to compare, and then come up with that document by Saturday, emailed back to me and saying, here's the deadline. Okay, and if you miss the deadline, 0. So I'm just trying to pick it up. Required for the class, basically Windows XP book, like I said, and if you can find an e-version out there, fantastic, there is, okay. Linux operating system. I would recommend that you have at least 2 USB sticks, one that you're going to use for what's called the student data that goes along and parallels with the book, and then another one we'll use for the Linux. You could probably get by using one for the Windows, and then after the Windows one, you could wipe it clean and use the second one to do Linux stuff. That's really up to you. Or you could just simply get 2 sticks. USB sticks are kind of cheap these days. So, but at least 16 gigs, it's up to you. If you got a 3.0 port, fantastic, then buy a 3.0 stick, kind of thing. So you need a PC or a Mac, tablets, smartphones, Chromes, right? Remember, I said this already, okay? Won't work for this class. Okay, and that you have to be able to install a virtual software like a VMware or something like that to be able to then turn around and install an operating system like Linux or like Windows XP. Again, how come we're using Windows XP? Well, if you look at the command line interface, which is the power users, go-to place or whatever and stuff, that still exists even in Windows 10, Windows 11. You can go to the command line, CMD, okay, and do that. The only difference is that there's some older programs that actually do work really well that came out of XP that are kind of been, weaned off the later versions that they were kind of streamlining it. The other thing is that an older book like this is cheaper to get, easier to get. Again, there might be some, digital versions that you find free out there, okay. Or if I used a brand new book and stuff, you're going to be paying a couple $100 for it. So I think we can get through the command line, especially since there's 2 books for this class, okay. There's a link to the VM account, VM software where you get the VM software. There's a couple of optional books. Sometimes people say, hey, is there anything else I can look to kind of learn some more about the Windows commands or the Linux commands, the command line interface? Well, here's a couple of books. They're not required. They're just optional for you if you wanted to have a little more additional resources. Attendance, okay. Basically, I'm going to take attendance based upon your activity. If you do not participate with your group that week, you're going to get a 0. Let me say that again. If you do not participate on the group homework that week, you're going to get a 0 and you're going to be marked absent that week, okay? On the 4th absence, I'm going to drop you. Drop deadline is at the end of the 9th week. If you want to drop, you can drop anytime for any reason. You don't need any excuses before the 9th week. After the 9th week, the school is very, very rigid about what they will accept as a valid drop. Keep in mind that if you think you're just getting behind, a lot of times the school will say, you can have to drop all your classes. You can't just selectively drop the ones you're not doing well in. You can do that before the drop deadline. After the drop deadline, your excuse really is going to say, hey, am I pulling out of classes this whole semester? Okay, so again, that's between you and admissions and records as far, or web advisor and how to do that, but there's a drop deadline for that. 4 absences, 4 weeks if you did not participate, whatever the 4 are. They don't have to be 4 in a row. Whatever those 4 are, you get dropped on that 4th absence. Okay, cool. All right, scroll down a little bit further. Okay, grading policy. Basically, there's the group homework. There is a Windows midterm and a Windows final, a Linux midterm and a Linux final. So the Linux final is actually what's done during finals week. So we don't have like a massive one final covering the whole class. We have 2 smaller finals, and we have midterms before each one of those. Okay. Group homework, like I mentioned, stuff, are assigned pretty much weekly. Okay, sometimes it's 1 chapter, sometimes it's 2. It just depends on what we're trying to get through, particular for that week. Again, it's your responsibility to fully participate with your group. Be proactive. Your group is not going to sit there and just carry you. That's not their responsibility. It's your responsibility to be proactive. Okay, the final, as I mentioned, is due by a Tuesday at 9 p.m. not a Saturday. So in finals week, you don't have till Saturday. You have only until Tuesday to submit it. And again, I will send out some reminder emails, okay, when things are getting closer and stuff, but your responsibility to read this information in the course outline and be accountable, okay? If you're planning on cheating, please read this and stuff. Don't cheat. Okay, don't have somebody else take your test or do your homework or sign up for whatever. Just don't do that, because if you're going to get nailed, you're going to get an F. You may get kicked out of my class. You may even get kicked out of the school. Okay, this technology has gotten really easy to capture when people have copy and pasted from the internet, or even copy and pasted something that was submitted to my class last semester. Okay, so don't do it. Okay. General policy, you have the right to, so you have the responsibility to have access to your own PC or Mac for this class, okay? And that I'm not your technical support, okay? You can use the library for some things, but some libraries are, don't let you get to the command prompt. They're certainly not going to let you install software. And so keep that in mind as you're going through that. That there may be some limitations. So in order to take this operating system class, you need access to a computer that you can install stuff on. If not, you can't take the class until you're ready to do that. Okay. I reserve the right to change the times, the assignments and stuff. Usually I'll announce them. I rarely do that. Okay. And if you need some assistance under the American Disabilities Act and stuff for DSPNF office, you have to file that formally. Okay. I cannot just say, oh yeah, you have a disability. So you just told me, sure, I'll go ahead and get you this, this, and this. It's like, nope, you have to do the formal process through the school, or else everybody's got to be treated fairly the same way across the board. Okay, so I just wanted to put that out there in that process. Okay, all right, let me come back to modules a second here. Okay, now, and again, I want to refresh my screen just to make sure it's capturing it. Okay, so that was the course outline. Okay, again, starting in chapter 2, you're going to have access to students' data that you'll need to zip files from. You should use 7-zip. Don't use WinZip. If you try to unzip a file using WinZip nowadays and stuff, it'll use the current date and timestamp for files and folders. And this assignment is usually based upon the existing one, the data disk that came with the book or whatever, or I can give you the actual student data zip is right here, and you'll want to use 7-zip to unzip it. Okay, or something like that, something that will not corrupt those dates and times, or at least if they do, then you're going to get a couple of those questions wrong, but hopefully there's enough people in your group that will have done it right, and you'll just say, oh yeah, my date timestamp, as we're learning about date timestamps, is off because you used WinZip and it had all the current date that you unzipped it. Okay, I typically like the 7-zip because it creates the files based upon the original creation dates, not by the time you actually did it. Anyway, that's a more recent change with WinZip. Okay. Again, getting access to Windows. Here's one link, to Windows XP Professional for you to download. When you install it and stuff, it's going to ask for a product key. Again, what you should take is, let's say that I have a home computer and I have a Windows 10. Okay. What I'm going to want to do is I want to install VMware. Okay. That's pretty easy. Okay. And I'll give you a link down here for VMware and stuff as well. And then you're going to want to install Windows XP inside of VMware. And just like a normal installation, it's going to say, what's the product key? And I even give you some product keys that you can find out here in the web as well. Okay. And then you're going to do the same thing later in the semester with Linux. Okay. So let me get back here to here. Here's week 2. So what should you do in week 2? Wait, back up. What's in week 1? Do the discussion board post by Wednesday in order to stay in the class. Outside of that, I'm going to form you in the group. I'm going to send you an email of who's in which groups have been assigned. You need to start talking with those people in the group that you're assigned to and figure out how you're going to coordinate your homework assignments each from week to week. I typically encourage people to say, look, the assignment becomes available on Sunday. Everybody gets it at the same time. Okay. Give everybody a couple of days through the weekend, you know, the rest of the weekend, whatever, to kind of work and get those, and pick a day like Wednesday and say, okay, everybody needs to submit their answers to that assignment by Wednesday to your common place. And then maybe that's Wednesday night or Thursday, you all get together either virtually or through those assignments and compare answers and stuff like that. Okay. You got to come up with one document, one like Word document that has all the questions and the answers, again, with the list at the top, with each individual group member's name and a percentage on whether or not they did fully participate. Okay. What else do you have? There's some PowerPoints in here. You know, a lot of people think that PowerPoints are the place to find all the answers. You can find some, but not all of them. So I just dumped the entire PowerPoint for this entire book and stuff there for you. Okay. Then you have your study guide document. Okay. Now the study guide document and stuff is the one that is actually going to be what you're going to do for chapter 1. Okay. So that's the assignment that's going to be basically due by that Saturday. Then I have a little video on how to create a a student activity disk. And I even have the zip link to it. There's the actual student data. And then these are my 2 overviews. These are my 2 video recordings that I created for chapter 1. I did them in 2 because there's too much to cover in just 1. Okay, so that's what you should watch as you're reading the chapters, as you're working on the homework, as you're coordinating homework with your group. Seems like a lot? Yeah, it is. It's a fun class. There's a lot of work and stuff, but it's not as hard as some of the other classes, but it's not like it's as easy like CIT12 or 15. Okay, this is not a computer concept class. Okay, you need to have CIT12 or 15 before you even take this class. If you haven't taken it, you really shouldn't be taking this class at all. The school should bounce you out because prerequisite is CIT12 or CIT15. There is a prerequisite for this class. Okay, so if you manage to finagle your way through with the counselor to get in this class without the prerequisite, you're going to have some issues down the line, not to mention the difficulty of this class just goes through the roof. Okay, prerequisites required. Got it. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, you know, I think that, you know, there's a kind of a layout from week to week. You get kind of the feeling of what's going to happen. So hopefully this kind of helps you a little bit with what this class is about. And if you're able to make it to that overview session at 9 o'clock on Tuesday, January 11th, that would be awesome. I get a chance to maybe see your faces. You turn the cameras on, I get to see your faces for a few minutes. Cool. Okay. And if you can't, like I said, I'll try to do a recording of that session and then post it there in one of the modules at the top or whatever, so you can kind of get an idea of what was discussed, because sometimes that's like an expansion of an FAQ or something like that. Okay. Other than that, what do you have to do the first week? You got to do your discussion post. There's no replies. It's just each person does a post and tells, you know, write up what your background is. Like, hey, I've taken technology classes. I'm a 3rd-year student. I've done it. I was in the military working on technology. That's cool. I'm basically using it for the attendance and to get an idea of, you know, what's your technical level is. Okay. Don't need a long dissertation. Probably just 1 paragraph is more than enough. I think we should be succinct in that one. Okay. So anyway, welcome to the class. Look forward to seeing you down the road. All right, let me go ahead and stop this share. Cool, and end the recording. So you have a great one.